Washington and the Geddes, first country.
Washington Journal airs live every morning at 7 Eastern on C-SPAN. Going back live to the Senate, senators have been meeting with Defense Secretary Leon Panetta for a closed-door briefing on Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Senator Durbin is speaking on the floor.
Suggested $5 monthly fee for the use of a debit card. I think we've kept track, and I believe every bank across America has said we're abandoning this approach. And it's a good thing, because it's an indication to me that consumers across America have a much larger voice in this process today than they did even a few weeks ago. Consumers and customers of major banks paid close attention when many of these banks, like Bank of America, said they were going to charge these customers $5 a month to have access to their own money in their checking account. I was asked at the time, what should we do? And I said, customers of these banks should vote with their feet. Start looking for another bank. Find a bank or a credit union that treats them in the manner they want to be treated, fairly and respectfully. Well, the message got out. And that message ended up creating a substantial move of customers from some banking institutions to others. Some suggest that the activity on credit union websites is now up 800%. The people at community banks all across America have signs in front of their banks saying, for instance, one in Georgia, "We agree, debit cards should be free." What we have at work here is a very fundamental principle of our economy, the free market economy. Transparency, so people know what they're being charged, and competition, so they have a choice. I think those are the two pillars of a successful free market economy. And now the banking industry, in many respects, is being introduced to it. I think this is a healthy thing. Prior to October 28, several large banks had announced they would begin charging monthly debit fees on many of their customers' accounts. Bank of America, $5 a month. Wells Fargo, $3 a month. Chase, $4 a month in some states. SunTrust of Atlanta, $5 monthly fee. Regions Financial of Birmingham, Alabama, $4 monthly fee. Numerous other large banks made clear that they would not charge monthly debit fees, and these banks included U.S. Bancorp, Citigroup, PNC, KeyCorp, USAA, and more. In response to the consumer reaction to this announcement, on Friday, October 28th, Wells Fargo and Chase announced they were abandoning their plans to charge these fees. On Monday, October 31st, SunTrust and Regions Financial announced they would also abandon their fee plans and provide rebates back to customers who'd already paid them. On Tuesday, November 1st, Bank of America announced it would abandon its monthly fee plans. Warren Buffett is a man I know and have come to know and respect, and he is an investor in some of these large banks. And he was asked over lunch recently to react to the Bank of America $5 monthly fee. He lifted his glass of Coca-Cola and said it was like new Coke. It really told the story that sometimes large companies really lose touch with their most basic consumers and their customers and make bad decisions. The question is, what will come of this next? And I think we really ought to ask ourselves, what have we learned from this experience over the last several weeks, and what do we hope that it leads to? Well, certainly we want more transparency, competition, and choice. But in order for that to happen, we need more disclosures so that the average customer of a bank knows what they're getting into. Have any of us taken the time to read the back of that monthly credit card statement? As a lawyer, I can tell you that if you ask for the entire statement concerning fees at banks, it's over 100 pages, almost impossible to decipher. We've got to get down to the basics where we understand our relationship with these financial institutions so we can choose those that serve our needs or the needs of our businesses. That's why the Pew Trust recently came up with a valuable suggestion. They have a disclosure form, one page that lists the basic fees that banks can charge. What they're suggesting is every bank should adopt this, just as we have a basic box in the back of food products with ingredients that we can turn to, how many calories, how much sodium, how many carbohydrates. We could have a basic disclosure on every bank's website so America can go shopping. Competition, free market. I think that's a healthy thing. The second thing that we need to follow on is the discovery that there are such things as swipe fees. We suspected it, but we didn't know what was going on really when we handed over a piece of plastic at a restaurant to buy something or a grocery store. Well, it turns out that every time that's swiped, the retailer, the restaurant, the business, is charged. How much are they charged? A variety of different amounts. And frankly, that grocery store, that bookstore, has no ability to negotiate that fee. It's a take it or leave it. You want plastic from Visa or MasterCard? Then you go ahead and pay this fee or else. That's changed, and the world's changed with it. When the Federal Reserve got the new authority October 1st to put in place a reasonable swipe fee for debit cards at about 21 cents a transaction, things started changing. There's a lot of money at stake. If you add up all the money collected by banks across America for swipe fees for debit and credit cards, it's about $50 billion a year. It's a huge amount. We all pay it. You pay it in your bottom line at the restaurant or at the grocery store or wherever you go shopping if you use plastic. So now there's a 21-cent ceiling established by the Federal Reserve on debit card fees. And that's what caused all of the reaction by the banks saying they were going to charge their customers more because of it. We need even more disclosure. For the largest banks in America, the top 1% of banks, if you go to an ATM machine today and put in your card, at some point they will usually notify you what the ATM fee is, accept or not accept. I think that same disclosure should be made on swipe fees. On the monthly credit card statements across America, we should see in parentheses next to our purchases how much was paid by that retailer to the credit card company. I think it will be a surprise to many people as to how much they are paying every time they use plastic. I should say how much retailers are paying and charging their customers every time they use plastic. That is more information. That's more transparency. That allows you to understand the relationship that, to this point, has been hidden in secret. I think that's an important thing. I've also been talking to Senator Reid of Rhode Island. He has some thoughts of interesting legislation that he and I are working on concerning the actual cost of credit card fee transactions to the banks and to the credit card companies so that we'll have a better understanding in that category as well. So what we're saying, Madam President, is something significant has happened over the last several weeks. I hope it is the beginning of a trend. One way to make sure this trend continues to the benefit of consumers and families and small businesses all across America is to make sure that Richard Cordray is appointed as the head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This, to me, is an agency which can continue this battle on behalf of consumers. It is literally the only consumer protection agency in the federal government. Now, many on the other side of the aisle don't like it. They don't believe in strong government oversight of these financial institutions in Wall Street. I disagree. I think Americans deserve to be given the basic information about their financial transactions so that with that information they can make their own decisions. I'm not saying the government should steer them one way or another, but at least give us the basic information. Let me decide the best bank for my family. Let me decide the best credit card or debit card for my family or my business. That's all we can ask. And finally, let me say this. This establishment of a debit card fee limit swipe fee limit is a breakthrough for many retailers. When I talk to retailers large and small, some of them chain stores and others just local stores, they were getting killed with this fee. It turned out to be the second or third most expensive item every single month. After personnel, after rent, here came the swipe fees that they had to pay to Visa, MasterCard, and the banks that issue their cards. Now these retailers feel like there's been a light that's been shined on this process and a limit that's been established when it comes to debit cards. Sadly, it's been abused. Redbox, which is a retailer of movies that most of us see even in Springfield, Illinois, next to the drugstore where you put in $1 and take a movie home, announced that they had to raise the price of their movies from $1 to $1.20 because of this new law. We looked into it, and here's what happened. They used to be charged a lower swipe fee by the debit and credit card companies. But now these companies are trying to make up their money that they're losing from this ceiling, and they're passing higher charges along to Redbox. So some companies, I think, need help. The Federal Reserve has continuing jurisdiction and authority when it comes to that help. And I hope that they will take a look at some of the consequences to companies like Redbox. I think what happened to them is unfair. And I think the Federal Reserve has the authority to change it. So we are at a tipping point. For years, the big banks have been rigging the rules with a lot of fees and charges we were not even aware of. The consumers of America have said enough. Through a combination of reasonable regulation and consumer voting with their feet, we are bringing transparency and competition back to the financial services industry. It's working, and it's long overdue. Consumers are now saying they'll only do business with banks that care about serving them instead of squeezing them. It's a good thing. We've got to do more things. Let's confirm Richard Cordray, and let's get it done soon so the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau can go to work to help us. Let's ensure that all bank fees are transparent, such as with the model checking account fee disclosure that I mentioned earlier from the Pew Charitable Trust, and ensure that all swipe fees are transparent because consumers ultimately pay those fees in higher prices. By promoting transparency and competition, we're going to help restore the balance between Wall Street and Main Street. Madam President, I yield the floor and suggest the evidence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President,
Senator from Illinois.
I ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
And I ask consent that a title amendment to H.R. 2112, the text of which is at the desk, be agreed to.
Without objection.
Madam President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise today to speak just for a moment about the significance of the month of November, which just began. About 10 years ago, Madam President, members of Congress decided to designate November as National Adoption Month. I think probably because November is sort of the beginning of the holiday season with Thanksgiving and then Christmas and to follow in December. And so it's a time when Americans from all parts of our country really take stock to slow down, to think about how important family is. We saw that a little bit last night with Halloween and all the children and their parents trick-or-treating throughout our nation. And then as Thanksgiving approaches, it becomes even more significant as families from all different walks of life gather around tables. Some tables are very plentiful and others are rather sparse with the treats based on the economic strength of the family. But nonetheless, many, many families gather for these holidays. And it reminds us that there are over 500,000 children in our country today that are really without family. They have been separated from their families, sometimes for good cause, but it's all tragic. Children have to be separated from families that abuse or grossly neglect them, and they have to be placed temporarily until we as government officials and nonprofit organizations can do a better job of either strengthening and reuniting those children with that family and trying to heal that family, or trying to promote another family for that child or that sibling group. We do many things here in Congress, both collectively as a Congress, but also individually in our own ways, to try to bring attention to the fact that there are orphans in America. Not just the 500,000 children in foster care, but of that 500,000, about 100,000 have had their parental rights terminated because the state has decided that reunification is not possible in this case, that children would be harmed irreparably from going back to that family, and so we work to try to find them another family, a better family to raise children, because governments do a lot of things well, Madam President, but one thing governments don't do well is raise children. Moms and dads and parents and families and responsible adults do that, not governments. So these children are in the temporary care of the government, but it's our hope that they can be placed as soon as possible into the loving arms of families. I've met hundreds of families that have adopted, including my own. It's a blessing to my husband and to me. I've just recently met a family from Minnesota, parents who had already several biological children. When they found out about the death of a woman and her husband in the Philippines that resulted in 9 children of that family being orphaned, Madam President, they stepped up and adopted all 9 of those children from the Philippines. And because of the good work of Senator Klobuchar and others, they were able to bring that whole sibling group to the United States. I could go on and tell you the most remarkable stories. But as members travel through the rooms of the Capitol this month, they're going to be very happy to see in the rotunda of the Russell Senate Office Building a very special exhibit, and that's the National Heart Gallery exhibit. About some 10 years ago, or maybe even less, some great nonprofits got together and said, what could we do to help show Americans that these are beautiful children with lots of potential, just waiting for a chance for a family to call their own? And so photographers donated their time to take really beautiful portraits of these children. So it doesn't look like just a mug shot, but beautiful portraits of these children, and some of them are going to be on display. This is an opportunity for us to become more familiar with how many different kinds of children are available for adoption. And I say that as sensitively as I can. These are children that are waiting for a family. Many of them would love to be adopted. They want to have a family forever. You don't just need a family until you're 18. You need a family forever. You'd like people to a father to walk you up the aisle when you're married. You'd like your mother to show up at the baptism of your child. You'd like a place to go home, even in your 40s and 50s for Thanksgiving. So we don't think anyone's too old to be adopted, and everyone needs a family. And so you'll see pictures of these children. Let me just make a couple of other points about this national exhibit. It's traveled around to many cities. Perhaps, Madam President, it's been to New Hampshire. I don't know. We would be happy to have it in Louisiana, but it's in the nation's capital for this 10th anniversary. Now, these numbers do sound staggering. 500,000 or 400,000 in foster care, 100,000 waiting to be adopted. But let me put this in perspective. There are over 100 million children in the United States, a third of our population between the age roughly of 0 and 13. So 100,000 is really a relatively small number. And if you think about it, there are 300,000 churches in America, roughly. So if just one family within 3 churches, just one family among 3 churches decided to step up and say, I'll take this child into my home, we would have no more orphans in the United States, which is our goal. Our goal is for every child in the United States and the world, if they are separated from their birth family, to find within a short period of time a home to call their own, preferably with a relative in kinship care, but if not, somewhere in the community. I don't think this is a difficult or impossible task. It seems overwhelming, but when you think of the assets of the world and you juxtapose the assets and strengths of the world against this particular problem, it's most certainly doable. If we can go to the moon, if we can explore science and space, we most certainly can put our good minds and sense together to figure out a way that governments can work better with nonprofits to make this happen. And I want to conclude with just saying one of the extraordinary organizations in the world that I believe are doing this work is the Dave Thomas Foundation. And many people may remember Dave Thomas as the founder of Wendy's. But I remember Dave Thomas as a child who came out of the foster care system, or a man who came out of the foster care system. I did not know him as a child. But I can remember him saying, he's passed, of course, but coming to Congress advocating on behalf of foster care children, of which he was one. Now, he beat the odds. Not only did he go on to be successful and create one of the most successful businesses in America today and perhaps even in the world, but as he's passed, his foundation carries on that work. And they've just released a wonderful report which will come more into focus in the coming weeks. But the bottom line is that through the work of this foundation, they have come up with new strategies, not complicated, quite simple, child-focused recruitment strategies that each and every one of our states can employ or deploy and use without a lot more expense to really see significant increases in the number of older children, particularly children with mental challenges and emotional challenges, adopted. In fact, they have increased, according to the study. Our research shows that children in foster care served by Wendy's Wonderful Kids are 1.7 times more likely, and children with mental disorders are 3 times more likely to be adopted using these different strategies. So in conclusion, Madam President, this is National Adoption Month. We have the Heart Gallery here in the Capitol and in Washington for pictures of some of the most extraordinary children. Their families may be broken, their families may be dysfunctional, but it doesn't mean they are. It means they are full of potential, ready for a family to call them their own and to step up and to live up to their potential. And there are many organizations, from this nonprofit to Wendy's Wonderful Kids, the Dave Thomas Foundation, and hundreds of others working to solve this problem. So I thank my colleagues. Many have been very active this last year in this regard, and I wanted to honor the Heart Gallery and the great work of the organizations that have put that together. It's made a meaningful difference, making these children, through these beautiful photographs, very real to all of us. So we know they're not just statistics, They are really children with heartbeats and dreams and hopes and aspirations, and they would make wonderful additions to many of our families. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.
And I'd suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to speak for what time I might consume, but it probably would be in the neighborhood of 20 or 25 minutes.
Without objection.
Today, I'd like to take a few moments to talk about the importance of oversight work of the Congress, and it's a very critical function of Congress. As one of the three branches of government, Congress is a very important pillar of our government. Our system provides for checks and balances between the three branches of government. Not only do we here in the Congress legislate, but we must make sure that the other two branches are not overstepping their power, and that's the function of oversight. I've been conducting oversight of the executive branch since I first came to the Senate. I take oversight very seriously. It's often an overlooked function for members of Congress. It's not a glamorous function. It's a lot of hard work. Some people have said recently that my oversight work is political. Quite honestly, people who say that are the ones who are in fact political or maybe ignorant of what I do, because I happen to be an equal opportunity overseer. I don't care if it's a Democrat or a Republican occupying the White House. If something needs to be investigated, I'm going to investigate it. In 2008, I was glad to hear the President-elect talk about the most transparent government ever that he was going to institute under his administration. Unfortunately, up to this point, this administration has been far from transparent, at least far from transparent in the way he said he was going to be so transparent. If any of us thought it was bad before, it's worse now. But my message about oversight is combined with a very important reminder about the rule of law, a philosophy upon which our country was founded. So I would like to talk about this administration's evasive and disappointing response to Congress about two different policies. One, the immigration policy and administrative enforcement of that, and Operation Fast and Furious. I will first discuss immigration. Since the founding of our country, our immigration laws have been a source of discussion. We were born a nation of immigrants and still welcoming to people coming to our country legally. We have welcomed men and women from diverse countries and provided protection to many who flee from persecution. We have been generous, and we will continue to be generous. Yet we have seen our country face many challenges and have attempted to restrict immigration levels. The first immigration law of 1790 tried to limit citizenship to certain individuals and instituted what is called the good moral character requirement. We created quotas in the 1920s to only do away with those quotas 45 years later. We even provided amnesty to millions of undocumented and hardworking people in the last big immigration law to pass Congress in 1986. Today, we're faced with another challenge of how to deal with more than 10 million undocumented persons. Congress struggles with this challenge on a yearly basis. It's important for lawmakers to bear in mind that the policies we make should benefit our country in the long term, and that they must be fair to current as well as future generations. People in foreign lands yearn to be free. They go to great lengths to be a part of our great country. It's a privilege that people love our country and want to become Americans. At the same time, however, we must not forget our great principle that our country was founded on, and that great principle is the rule of law. We want to welcome new Americans, but we need to live by the rules that we've set. We cannot let our welcome mat be trampled on, and we cannot allow our system of laws to be undermined. As a U.S. Senator, like all of my colleagues, I took an oath of office to honor the Constitution. I bear a fundamental allegiance to uphold the rule of law. That's why I'm deeply concerned about the immigration policies that are coming from this White House. The President's policies may be an impermissible intrusion on Congress's plenary authority over immigration law. They're pushing the envelope. and there's little transparency into their actions at a time when transparency was promised by this administration at the time that they were sworn in. As many of you know, last summer I exposed an internal Homeland Security memo that outlines ways President Obama could circumvent Congress and grant legal status to millions of undocumented individuals. So this is where oversight becomes very, very important. Whether or not this memo is an intent to get around law that Congress passes, of which the President of the United States, under his oath of office, is pledged to faithfully enforce. This memo was entitled, quote, "Administrative Alternatives to Comprehensive Immigration Reform," end of quote of the title. Now that title in and of itself kind of signifies efforts to get around law, to get around what Congress intended. Its purpose was, in their words, to, quote, "reduce the threat of removal of certain individuals present in the United States without authorization." Now, why, if you're enforcing, that's the end of the quote, why, if you're enforcing, faithfully executing the laws of the United States, would you want to, quote, "reduce the threat of removal of certain individuals present in the United States without authorization"? Isn't that word "without authorization" in and of itself an indication that people might be here illegally? The memo outlined more than a dozen ways to keep individuals in the country and to provide them with benefits or protections. I, along with my colleagues in the Congress, have asked repeatedly for assurances that these options were not being explored, but you know what? Our concerns have not been eased. The President, as well as the Secretary of Homeland Security, have only said that they don't plan to provide such benefits to the entire population of undocumented individuals. They claim that they'll use their discretionary authority and pursue relief on a limited and case-by-case basis. Now, the extent to which it's limited and it's case-by-case, you know, I confess the law probably provides for some administrative discretion, because if you're going to have people come to this country, Congress is not going to be able to write a law that's going to take every instance into consideration. But I go back to that title, the Administrative Alternative to Comprehensive Immigration Reform. So there's a need to change the laws on immigration, update them. So if everybody admits there's that need, why do you need administrative alternatives unless you're trying to get around what Congress intended? So we're asking these questions, and yet we have no idea if it's true that they want to do it strictly on a case-by-case and very limited basis, because we have reason to believe that we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, because we have no idea how many people are truly receiving the benefits and what standards are being used when determining that an individual is granted parole or deferred action. And these are the questions that in our oversight capacity we're asking, but we're not getting very many answers, as I'm going to show you here. Again, quoting the title, Administrative Alternatives to Comprehensive Immigration Reform, this memo from last summer also included a proposal to lessen, quote-unquote, extreme hardship standard. Now, under current law, aliens are inadmissible for 3 to 10 years if they have been unlawfully present in the United States for 180 days in the case of 3-year inadmissibility, or 1 year in case of 10 years of inadmissibility. The Department has discretion to waive the grounds for inadmissibility if it would result in an extreme hardship. Now, again, I'm willing to grant that there's some leeway in the law here. The amnesty memo states, quote, to increase the number of individuals applying for waivers and improve their chances of receiving them, Citizenship and Immigration Services could issue guidance or a regulation specifying a lower evidentiary standard for extreme hardship. Now, extreme hardship ought to mean the same from administration to administration, not some special definition of extreme hardship because we have a president that maybe wants to find some way of getting around the immigration laws because he doesn't want to work hard enough to get immigration reform passed through the Congress. Proponents argue that this redefinition of extreme hardship is needed for family unity and that the 3- and 10-year bars are overly burdensome. Well, Congress didn't consider the 3- and 10-year bars to be overburdensome, or we wouldn't have put them in the law in the first place. Now, if this standard is lessened, untold number of undocumented individuals will be able to bypass the 3-year and the 10-year bars that are clearly laid out in the Immigration and Nationality Act. My concern is that this policy, if implemented, is a blatant way to circumvent Congress and the law to keep as many undocumented aliens in the United States as possible. It's difficult to ascertain if this change or any other proposal from the amnesty memo is being considered by the Secretary. So I asked the Secretary about this very proposal when she testified before the Committee on Judiciary about 2 weeks ago. She admitted that the existing immigration law is difficult, but the Secretary wouldn't deny that discussions about changing the standard are even taking place. Well, what about the memo that I've referred to? Frankly, she refused to comment about the proposal during the hearing. Indeed, she said she was focused on exercising enforcement functions, which gets me to my next issue. A year after the 2010 amnesty memo circulated, we learned that the head of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and we use the acronym ICE for that, that's the agency responsible for enforcing the law, apprehending and deporting undocumented people in this country, directed his agents to use quote-unquote prosecutorial discretion on those with whom they come in contact. Now, what does this mean? In June of this year, Assistant Secretary Morton released a memo directing ICE officers to exercise prosecutorial discretion and to consider the alien's length of presence in the United States, the circumstances of the alien's arrival in the United States, particularly if the alien came as a young child, also take into consideration the alien's criminal history, the alien's age, whether or not there was service in the military, and whether they came here to pursue education in the United States. On August the 19th this year, Secretary Napolitano announced an initiative to establish a working group to sort through an untold number of cases currently pending before the Immigration and also before the federal courts to determine if they can be, quote-unquote, administratively closed. Now, this gets into big numbers. There are more than 300,000 cases pending before the Executive Office of Immigration Review. The Secretary claims that this process will allow them to direct resources at higher priority cases. This memo, an initiative outlined by the Secretary, are concerning, especially to those of us who said that our country is based on the rule of law. These policies seem to contradict that very important philosophy underlying our whole system of law. On September the 26th this year, I led 18 of my Senate colleagues in sending a letter to President Obama expressing dissatisfaction with these prosecutorial discretion policies. We said that this administration was encouraging undocumented aliens to come forward in hopes of relief. Now, this letter to the President is part of our constitutional responsibility of oversight. It is going to the President of the United States that said he was going to have the most transparent administration ever in the history of the country. So wouldn't you think we'd get a lot of answers? We asked the President to rescind the June memo and end the initiative outlined in August and requested that he make the Secretary available to all members of the Senate to explain how his immigration policies are consistent with the rule of law. Very simple process. Just have one of your cabinet people come up here and explain it all to us. You know what the President did? The President asked a bureaucrat from the department to respond to us on his behalf. The letter from this bureaucrat didn't address any points that we made in our letter and show complete disregard for the concerns raised. You know, I tell a lot of people in both Republican administrations, Republican and Democrat administrations, that I'm overseeing, doing my constitutional responsibility of oversight, that the longer you stonewall, and when the truth comes out, the more egg you're going to have on your face. And that's going to be true in this instance as well. So this is what we expect from the administration. We have many unanswered questions about this prosecutorial discretion initiative. Questions, several questions I'll give you. For example, how many cases will the working group sort through? You know, you can quantify that pretty easily. What standards will be used for adjudicating cases? In the rule of law, you ought to be able to tell us what's the process and what's the standard. Will those already ordered removed be considered for release? In other words, if somebody has already figured out you ought to be removed from this country, then there's somebody going to step in and say, no, maybe you don't have to be removed. Will those with a criminal conviction be eliminated from consideration for direction? We ought to know that if you committed a crime in this country, besides coming here illegally, are you going to be removed, or are you going to be given some discretion, or what you call prosecutorial discretion? How much in taxpayers' money will be expended for this effort, and when will the working group finish its work? Will the Department of Homeland Security keep the committee apprised and provide detailed information on who is granted a benefit, including work authorizations? What will happen to individuals who have their cases, quote, unquote, administratively closed? Now, these are questions that Congress passes a law, the President takes an oath to faithfully execute those laws, and we have a constitutional responsibility to make sure that what Congress intended is carried out. And we aren't saying that maybe Congress's intent isn't being carried out. We want questions answered to determine whether or not it's being carried out. And these are pretty simple questions that you write to the President of the United States. You ask for the Secretary to come and answer these questions for us. That doesn't happen. And we get a letter back from some low-level bureaucrat that doesn't even answer the questions. So how far can you go and be morally and ethically correct as President of the United States, saying at the time you're sworn in you're going to have the most transparent administration that this country's ever seen, and then stonewall Congress on simple little questions like this policy that you want to carry out called prosecutorial discretion. So we await answers and can only hope that they'll be more transparent about these policies than they have on the amnesty memo, assuming we get answers to our questions. The future of our country hinges in part on the policies that this administration is making behind her backs. Congress has a role to play, and that's not my position, that's the position of our Constitution. We need more sunshine in our government here in Washington on amnesty and numerous other issues, including one of my oversight investigations that involves federal law enforcement operations that went critically wrong. So I'm now turning to Fast and Furious. This program was a multi-agency effort run by federal prosecutors in Arizona and supervised by officials in the Justice Department headquarters here in Washington, D.C. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, or as we refer to it here in Washington as ATF, encouraged U.S. gun dealers, federally licensed gun dealers, to keep selling guns known to be transferred to people knowingly transferring the weapons to third parties. These buyers are called straw purchasers, and there were lots of reasons for the gun dealers, the federally licensed gun dealers, to be suspicious of this operation. The straw buyers were purchasing the kind of assault rifles preferred by the Mexican drug cartels. They repeatedly bought dozens of weapons at a time and then returned just days or weeks later to buy dozens more. They paid with paper bags full of tens of thousands of dollars in cash and bought very expensive, high-powered 50 caliber sniper rifles. All of this was plenty of cause for dealers to report the sales to the ATF as suspicious and then stop making the sales in the future. But the ATF had even more reasons to be suspicious than the gun dealers had, because the Drug Enforcement Administration, or DEA as we say it here in Washington, DEA had tipped off the ATF about the activities of the ring dealers using information from a wiretap in a related drug trafficking case. So the ATF knew that some of the straw buyers were on food stamps or unemployed, so a legitimate explanation for all the cash was very unlikely. Most importantly, the ATF knew that the straw buyers' guns ended up at crime scenes in Mexico just days or weeks after being bought in the United States. ATF knew all this information from the beginning of the investigation in late 2009. As early as January 2010, the DEA wiretap had even collected detailed information about who the ring dealer was selling guns to, and that information was available to the ATF. Yet our government allowed the ring of straw buyers to grow and operate freely for about a year. Starting in late 2009, agents who later blew the whistle on the mishandling of the case were ordered to merely watch and record what the straw buyers were doing, but not arrest them. The agents were not allowed to stop the straw buyers or even to question them. The agents were not even allowed to continue following the guns once they were transferred to unknown third parties or stash houses. Surveillance was simply abandoned. These details were apparently not provided to gun dealers, even though these gun dealers cooperated with the ATF from the very beginning. The government installed hidden cameras in at least one store, and dealers notified ATF each time one of the straw buyers came in for another purchase of guns. By March of 2010, the ATF had gathered evidence that the intent of the straw buyers was to transfer these weapons to criminals and to Mexican drug cartels. The ATF applied for wiretap authority and supplied all the necessary details to the Justice Department here in Washington, yet it was not until December 15, 2010, that a single one of the straw buyers was arrested. And just by coincidence, or was it just for some other reason? The day of the first arrest was the day that U.S. Border Patrol agent Brian Terry was murdered. And you know what? Two of the weapons bought right under the ATF's nose nearly a year earlier turned up at the murder scene. Within a day, the straw buyers of those two guns was finally arrested. The other straw buyers were indicted a few weeks later in January 2011. ATF agents who knew the ugly truth blew the whistle. The whistleblowers made sure that Congress and the Terry family were fully informed. I started asking questions and have been asking questions ever since, but getting answers out of a Justice Department stonewalling is like pulling teeth. At first, the Department explicitly denied the allegations in writing, and officials implied it was all hogwash in a widely attended briefing for Senate Judiciary Committee staff. But then, the evidence started coming out, document by document and witness by witness. The truth became so clear that it was no longer deniable. An internal briefing paper explicitly said that the strategy of the case was to, quote, allow the transfer of arms to continue to take place, end of quote. Emails prove that a gun dealer had prophetically worried that the operation could lead to the death of a Border Patrol agent. But ATF and Department of Justice officials reassured the dealers that cooperation was still necessary. They falsely assured the dealer that there were secret methods of stopping the guns before they went south. The House Oversight Committee issued subpoenas and held 2 hearings. My staff worked with them on 2 staff reports detailing the testimony and the documents that we have gathered. The Justice Department stepped in and tried to control the flow of information, but we continue to receive documents and information from confidential sources. The Justice Department provided documents from the ATF files, but until yesterday, very few documents from the Department of Justice's own files. The Department waited to deliver them until Halloween to produce the first substantial batches of documents from the Department of Justice, even though we asked for documents at the beginning of the summer. They also waited until the night before the head of the Criminal Division, Lanny Brewer, was set to testify before the Judiciary Committee to provide 652 pages of documents. Mr. Brewer also admitted to knowing all about gunwalking in what's referred to as Operation Wide Receiver as far back as April 2010. Now, we have to go through these new documents to see what they contain. But the first smaller batch of documents included several memos to Attorney General Holder that appear to contradict the Attorney General's earlier claim that he had never heard of Fast and Furious until sometime April this year. The documents also show that Attorney General Holder, current Chief of Staff, received a detailed briefing 18 months ago, March of 2010. He was the acting Deputy Attorney General at the time, so obviously the number 2 person in the Justice Department. The Deputy Attorney General even took detailed handwritten notes on the presentation. However, Attorney General Holder says that he didn't know anything about it until after the controversy became public. That's also what Mr. Brewer said today as well. I know the Attorney General was at least aware of the whistleblower allegations on January 31st this year because I personally handed him 2 letters about the issues in my office on that very day. As for exactly what else he knew and when, his statements will have to be tested against the rest of the evidence as we continue to investigate. Included in the documents released recently were emails between senior Justice Department officials that explicitly talked about gun walking, and these memos dated October 2010. Gun walking is a term that the whistleblowers use for sitting by and not stopping the guns even though the guns could have been stopped and people arrested. These senior Justice Department officials were discussing whether the head of their criminal division should attend upcoming press conferences on Fast and Furious and Wide Receiver. The second case is that Mr. Brewer admitted to knowing about yesterday where ATF had walked guns even before Fast and Furious. Their concern was over how tricky the press conference could become because of the guns that were walked. You know, it's kind of common sense. If you can't talk about it in a press conference, you probably shouldn't be. If you can't talk about it in a press conference, you probably shouldn't be doing it in the first place. So, these memos show that they clearly anticipated the controversy even 2 months before Agent Terry was murdered and before the whistleblowers came to me about it. This makes the initial false denials even more outrageous. Some have seized on the reference to a case from the previous administration that suggests that gun walking was nothing new and that our investigation's partisan. Now let me be clear. There is nothing, absolutely nothing partisan about my desire to get to the bottom of Fast and Furious. My motivation is to make sure nothing like this ever happens again, and the Terry family ought to get the truth about their son's murder, and also the untold number of Mexican citizens ought to be righted who may have been victims of this operation as well. During my testimony before the House committee, I asked the members to put aside politics and just listen to the Terry family because they were going to testify later on, and also to listen to the whistleblowers as they testified that very day. But some people see everything through the lens of their own politics. Rather than listen to the evidence, they want to blame the Second Amendment for Agent Terry's death. Whoever pulled the trigger is the one to blame, not the Second Amendment. That is the person who should be brought to justice. The straw buyers who illegally bought the guns and the government officials who stood by and watched them do it all need to be held accountable. So that's the story of Fast and Furious so far. But what does it tell us about the rule of law in this great country we call America? When we talk about the rule of law, we're usually referring to the idea that government should make decisions consistently, and that being according to law. Those decisions should be based upon some neutral principle rather than on somebody's personal whims or bias. And those decisions should apply to everyone equally without allowing a lot of discretion for government officials to pursue their own agendas. In short, we should be ruled by laws, not men. Our government gets its authority from the consent of the governed. Representatives elected by the people write the laws, and the executive branch enforces them. However, over the years, our government has grown so big and so complex that it's hard to hold government officials accountable for how they apply the law. In Fast and Furious, it has taken us months to sort out responsibility because of this problem. There are dozens of bureaucrats pointing fingers and shifting blame. There are dozens of lawyers parsing words and shuffling paper. At the end of the day, what we know is that several people in government decided not to enforce the law that they took an oath to faithfully execute. These people believed it was within their discretion to allow straw purchasers to operate despite all the evidence that law was being broken. In most other field offices, obvious straw buyers were stopped, questioned, and arrested, but not in Phoenix, Arizona. As one of the whistleblowers put it, Operation Fast and Furious represented a, quote, colossal failure of leadership, end of quote, at every level that was aware of it. Just what each official knew at each level in each agency is something that needs to be clear before our investigation is complete. For the rule of law to function properly, there needs to be supervision, accountability, and consistency. And you know what? The transparency the President promised, transparency leads to accountability. Government officials must know that their discretion to play around in gray areas of the law has limits. It is the job of elected leaders to enforce those limits on behalf of the people who elected them. But there are so many officials and so many decisions that accountability seems hard to impose. The President himself recognized this in the context of Fast and Furious back in March of this year. Now, when the President was first asked about Fast and Furious on Spanish-language television, he was pressed about how he could not have known about it. Kind of the very same questions we're asking the Attorney General. How could you not have known about it? So the free press in America asked the President how he could not have known about Fast and Furious. By then, 3 months after a Border Patrol agent had been murdered and guns illegally sold appearing at the scene of the murder. So what did the President respond to Spanish television? Quote, "This is a pretty big government, the United States government. I've got a lot of moving parts," end of quote. Mr. President, exactly. That's the problem. Government needs to be limited. Government needs to be focused. And government needs to be constrained by the rule of law. I yield the floor.